We are live. Thank you all for tuning in. My name is LaShirley Scott. I'm the CEO and president of Scott Center for Observation, Treatment, and Transition. And today we are going to talk to real men in sickle cell. So today I have James. Mr. James is currently the HR manager at Arconic, Tennessee operation facility where he partners with the leadership team in translating business strategy into HR action that drives business results. He is also the proud father of two sickle cell warriors. His children, James, who is 28, and Jaleece, is that how you say her name?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, who's 22, were both born with sickle cell disease. And then we also have Anthony, who is also known as AC, has been with the Sickle Cell Disease Foundation for almost 10 years. He started off as a volunteer at Camp Crescent, and now he is the senior CHW manager and works as a CHW at the Martin Luther King Junior Outpatients Sickle Cell Clinic. Did I say that right? I feel like I did.
Yes,
Yes.
you did.
So in addition to that, he also serves as an assistant program director for Teens Transition Program and a logistics director camp at Crescent. So we are in for a treat tonight. We are gonna have our candid conversations. But I am excited to kind of let the audience know. One, I want to start with you, Mr. James. So we know that you have two children who are now grown, should I say, that live with sickle cell disease. So I guess I just want to know, like, in this 28 years, do you think things have changed, or do you still see a lot of the struggles that you've had to deal with when they were younger?
Thank you for that question. I would tell you in the 28 years, the one thing that I've seen change. One, I've been exposed to sickle cell my entire life. I didn't realize it. My grandmother had sickle cell. I didn't realize that till I was an adult. I can just remember her when I was younger. She'd get really bad headaches, or there'd be days where she would just didn't get out of the bed. And when she passed away, she was actually the oldest living sickle cell patient in the state of Michigan at the time of her death. And so that was just not knowing. But then once my children were born, living in Michigan, what I saw change, honestly, living in Michigan, we had access to great health care. They'd go to University of Michigan. With my job, I relocated a couple of times. And in relocating, one of the things that drove my decisions would be healthcare. So I went from Michigan to Iowa, and then they went to the University of Iowa. Well, the thing that I saw more than anything is that pediatric sickle cell patients have great care. There's a great system. The response is there. It's just awesome. But it seems like once you transition from pediatrics to that adult, it seems to be a little bit of a drop off in the level of care, or I don't necessarily say if it's care, patience with the sickle cell patients. And so I really saw that change. Now, in terms of medications, I saw that on one side going from pediatric to an adult. But then I also, from a medication standpoint, hydroxyurea. My children started on hydroxyurea, and I saw that. So now I understand that as we're getting more involved here in Tennessee, I'm understanding there are more treatments available. But I just really, what I've saw and what really has drove me to really start speaking up and being more of a sickle cell advocate is that I can see how there are adults who just suffer in silence because they don't have anyone that can articulate for them, or advocate for them when they're hurting. And so, as much as the care, I really stayed up on it when they were younger, and there was a lot of care. But it's really a whole thing with the adults that I don't think gets talked about a lot. And I think that's really what I've seen, going through this for 28 years and now transitioning from my kids to my kids being adults.
So I want to ask AC. So to his point, what Mr. James stated, do you see in your experience, what is it that you see with patients that are transitioning from pediatric to adult care? Because we've heard some of his concerns or what he saw, but like, do you still see some of those same?
Uh, I, I I would say the main things that we see. Number one is whether or not the institution itself has decided to properly transition the patient. What I mean by that is that some institutions, they have what they like to call their problem child type of patient, right? And so that's the patient that they normally transition early. Instead of it being 21, they'll probably transition that patient over at 18. And when they do that, it's much more of a kind of just, here you go, take it or leave it. There's really is no follow up on their end to make sure that that patient has been seen with us, or is still being seen with us, or anything like that. If it's a patient that they deem is very compliant and not hard to deal with, then that's the patient that will usually get around 21, and they'll start that transition process early. And they'll say, hey, so and so's getting ready to turn 21 in a few months. We want them to come down and meet with you guys, et cetera, which is great for those, but it's not great for the people who they deem as difficult. Here in California, one of the reasons that we started our transition program was because there was such a disconnect. There was a large gap of just um, pediatric centers dropping the ball, and patients weren't being transitioned over properly. So our highest mortality rate for people with sickle cell disease was between the ages of 18 to 25. So a lot of those kids that didn't properly transition, they mainly used the emergency room as their first source of medical care. And so by the time they got to us, when we were able to open up sickle cell clinics, they were already iron overloaded, or anything like that. They hadn't been immunized. They hadn't been on any type of therapies like hydroxyurea, or anything else that's normally available.
Mm. So I want to go back. So I heard you say that's deemed problem child. So is that of their non-compliance, or what
Yes.
does that consist
That's
of?
that
Okay.
that's their non-compliant, but not only is they're non-compliant, it's just, usually if they have some type of behavioral issues, or if they have some type of bipolar disorder, for one reason or another, they've decided that this person needs to go now, you know, um, and they just are like, hey, look, here's a place over there, here's the number, don't let the door hit you on your way out.
That's so unfortunate. And I always, and Mr. James, you can jump in too when I make this comment. I always had the question of, when do the child go from not being innocent? So you got your innocent, oh, they're sick, they don't feel well, but then it's now we have these stigmas that are associated with patients, or their disease is stigmatized, but then you put that other condition, whether they have a diagnosis or they're not compliant. But sometimes I think when we speak of non-compliant patients, we're not checking into all social determinants of health. There's a lot of barriers to why patients are not compliant sometimes. Rather, I mean, I think about just me, and I don't even have sickle cell disease. Sometimes I'm just tired. I don't want to go nowhere. But if the weather is stopping them from being able to make you know, that travel, or transportation is a barrier, or what I mean? Like, there's just so many things that are associated. And I hate when I see which I say I dislike when I see clinics just write them off without, like, is the social worker or is the community health worker bridging the gaps? And I know you guys do a really good job over there at the Sickle Cell Foundation. I know y'all do. But other people, are they doing those same things? Like, what is the routine or the regimen to figure out what we can do to make sure that patients aren't non-compliant, or that there aren't barriers set in place? You get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, It's just for me. I think it's deeper than that. I tell everybody, sickle cell is just kind of a part of a person. It's not the whole person, right? So that means that they're not immune to any other issues, poverty, parents dying, or getting beat on, or well, whatever it may be. They're not immune from those things. So you know, it, it's hard when people don't understand really kind of the culture that that they're serving. If I'm a doctor who grew up in the suburbs who doesn't really understand kind of what happens in poor neighborhoods or in the projects or something like that, then whenever I do encounter these people, yeah, I probably would feel like this is on them. They're a difficult person because I don't understand how they got to be this difficult person. And normally providers don't have the time or don't want to understand why something is the way that it is. They're just like, all right, well, if you don't want to take hydroxyurea, or if you don't want to do this, or if you're not doing that, then there's no point on me seeing you anymore.
Yeah. I think a couple of things, that I think about, from this great discussion is it's about advocacy also, right? Because I think there are times when those patients, regardless of, where they're coming from, what I've seen some communities that have stronger advocacy and support groups. I think there's a piece where support groups have to come in and work in partnership, with what the healthcare providers are doing, with things like what you're doing, AC, with the things that you're doing, Ms. Scott. I think somehow we got to figure out how do we so when you're not compliant, because I have my son. When I talk about not compliant, that was one of our biggest struggles, right? But then until I peeled it back and sat and talked to him and tried to understand, hey, why are you struggling with taking the medicine and having those discussions? And he explained it to me. Whereas instead of trying to direct, I really had to start listening more, right? And truly trying to understand, and then trying to work with them to come up with a solution. I think there's a piece that, again, it's hard and I just know how I am when I'm not feeling well. I'm not the normal me. Most people will see me and say, pretty jovial, nice going guy. But when you're in pain, that's not you, right? And so I can't even imagine trying to go to a hospital, trying to go get care, and you're hurting and you can't really get that across to the healthcare providers, and then they make assumptions, and then you get frustrated. I think that's where the one thing that I've just been trying to see, how do we increase the support groups and the advocacy, being a voice for those sickle cell adults, man. Because again, I could just see how it'd be easier just to suffer in silence if you feel like you're not being heard, or like you said, at some point you go to the emergency room, and if they think you're a frequent flyer, if you will, that level of care isn't there because they see, oh, here comes James, or oh, James is back again, right?
Yeah.
Without understanding, as you said, they see everything that's behind James, and so I just don't know. I think we kind of had this discussion maybe last week, Ms. Scott. How do we connect all of the pieces? We have a lot of people that have passion around sickle cell disease, whether it's from an advocacy standpoint, whether it's from a practitioner, whether it's, there are a lot of different pieces. And how do we just get together so that everyone can get into that area, that space where they feel the most comfortable and make a tangible impact, on it. And how does that look? Because they're the people who need it, right? And
Yeah, I will say this. So you pretty much had a lot to unpack there. So first things first. A lot of things that I think are needed are implicit bias trainings. And this is with healthcare professionals across the board. So implicit bias trainings, cultural competency trainings, them hearing the patients, because I think hearing it from the actual patients, letting them share their testimony to say, this is where, I feel that the lack of care or there's a lack thereof, right? So that we can bridge the gap and making sure that we are across the board, that we're making sure that the patient is being heard, but also the services are being provided adequately for these patients. But then the second piece, when you stated the support groups, well, for one, I know here where I'm at, there is a prior to COVID, excuse me, prior to COVID, our support group was doing really well. Sorry. Our support group was doing really well prior to COVID. When COVID happened, it's like the people died off. I don't know where they went. They went to hiding. I don't know.
Wow.
So now we are trying to rebuild and let them know that we are a support system. And it's not, and let me be clear, I put this in the forefront. It's not always about a person having sickle cell being a part of these support groups. We need people that don't have sickle cell to be a part of these groups so that we can, move together and make these things happen, because we know that these patients typically they're not 100%. Let me just say that. And it's not to say that they can't do these things, but they need help doing these things. So I always stress that. So this month we challenged everybody to bring 5 friends. I don't care where you get them from, so that we can rebuild and regain that level of support, but then also having that, as you say, the advocacy piece to be able to, kind of push through and make sure that everybody's voice is being heard, that we're addressing the stigmas, the barriers, the misconceptions, just the whole, it's so many intricate pieces to sickle cell that it's crazy. So when we talk about these things, it's not just one thing. I feel like we pull a layer back, it's another layer. Then you pull another layer back. It's just so many layers to this disease. I don't think people really understand. So if we can just get them to understand the basic of, listen, they were born with this, they've been living with it all their life. So technically, they know what works for their body. They know what doesn't, because they've been going through. It's not like they were diagnosed later on. This is something they've been dealing with their entire life. So just trying to survive every day. And I think this is what you were speaking on, AC. People ain't always thinking about their condition. They just trying to make it. They trying to make it day to day. So outside of just having, sickle cell disease, we have a comment here. Nothing is more annoying than the medical professionals assuming you just want meds. Absolutely. I say it all the time. Y'all, a lot of the patients have these medications at home. They have them at home. The reason why they come in is because they need help managing the pain. But I think a lot of that lack of knowledge comes from, you got to remember, patients weren't living as long as they're living now. So you have pediatric hematologists taking care of adult patients. There's not a lot of adult hematologists, and we all know this. There's a scarcity of it, right? So I think just not having that level of understanding on how to deal with the pain management as they get older. I always question, if you are starting this child on Percocet at 7, what is going to happen when they turn 20? What other alternatives are we providing? Because we still want to make sure that we're managing the pain and that they're at least comfortable enough to manage day-to-day, activity. But if you're only prescribing opiates and then you claim that they're drug seeking as adults, to me, not you guys, but the medical professions have created the stigma. They put that stigma there. The patients didn't do that. So, I always question that. And this is why I think it's important to have these type of conversations, because I don't know about you, Mr. James, but I know with me having 2 sickle cell warriors, I typically do warm baths. I'm adding Epsom salt, green alcohol, bubble bath. I'm trying to do everything before we even get to the part of, do you need some medication? We'll do Motrin and Tylenol. And then, we got the heating pad going. I try to use other alternatives before we go to that extreme measure. And I think just having that level of understanding of what sickle cell is and how you can incorporate other things. So I know I use what is the name of this oil? It's like a chronic pain oil. It's not CBD, but it's some other oil. It's through doTERRA. So I use that when they're in pain, So it's just knowing that there's other resources or alternatives before you start taking pain and, opiates.
Yeah.
Especially so young.
Exactly.
But a lot of parents do not know. So I think, like I said, just having these types of conversations, we already know that the stigma is out there. Whether you're in a business suit or you're in a jogging suit, the stigma is there. As soon as you say sickle cell disease and you're in
Yep.
the ER, that is just, unfortunately, that is the misconception behind it. So I don't know. I guess my question is to both of you: How do we change the narrative? How can we empower the patients to try to seek other alternatives? Or, I do believe in mind over matter. We know a lot of the patients, when they go to the hospital, they're either on the phone or they're playing some type of video game because we know that keeps them from thinking about the pain. And I think people have the misconception that they're faking, that this is where their drug treatment comes from. So how do we change that narrative?
I think it's you hit on a couple of things, that the education and awareness piece. I think it really I stopped to read that. Okay. So I think it's the education, awareness, and the discussion, right? I've learned a couple of things here. When you mentioned the Epsom salt, the warm baths, the heating blankets, we do all that. Now I'm going to be hitting you up later about the oil that you mentioned, the acupuncture. I think it's about how do you, it goes back to that collectiveness, right? That I talked about. It feels like there's a lot of fragmented activity going on, around the country. Like I said, people in Canada. Somehow it's that education, awareness, and then action, right? And it's that collective action, like you said, involving getting all the key stakeholders, getting the sickle cell patients, figuring out, okay, having what's the strategy, right? Putting together a strategy so that we all had the same passion, and we all are from diverse backgrounds, but we're all on the call right now because of our love and our passion around sickle cell. So how do we transfer that into tangible action, with a comprehensive and a holistic strategy, right? To eat the elephant one bite at a time, if you will, right? And how do we, making a difference in our own area, but how do we eat that elephant? Because sometimes when you get passionate around it, you want to take it all on at once. But it's just, how do we challenge each other and be open to feedback and say, okay, here's our strategy to eating this elephant one bite at a time.
So AC, I agree with you, Mr. James. So my question to you, AC, because California is always known to do stuff before everybody. They be ahead of the game. What y'all got going on over there? We need.
Well, I mean, shoot, if that's the case, I should have put my boss on the phone because she's really kind of the mastermind. But um, we have an initiative through the state. We went up to Sacramento and we advocated for this money to open adult sickle cell clinics around the state. And so they gave us a $30 million grant. It was us and the Center for Inherited Blood Disorders, Dr. Diane Nugent. And so, basically we started opening up these sickle cell clinics with sickle cell experts. And so there's, for us here at the foundation, there's an emphasis on community health workers, right? Because community health workers, we know the community, number one. But we, culturally, we're aware of what's going on, and thirdly, we know how to communicate with these providers as well. And so, like for my clinic, Martin Luther King, my clinic is in the heart of uh, Los Angeles, Compton, and Watts. Um, and I grew up in Compton. My dad was a pastor in Compton for many years, so I have a really good grasp on what's going on here, uh, and how people think and what people do. So the doctor that I work with is white, okay, um, and her name is Dr. Susan Claster, but she's taken care of people with sickle cell for 40 years. So as great as a physician as she was, she's better now because some of the things that she was maybe didn't understand, I'm able to come in and say, "Hey, look, patient X didn't understand a word that you said. You got to slow down." Or I can go in and I can be like, all right, look, hey, look, Susan, you gotta take it easy on this person today. I'm like, this happened, that happened, being able to check the temperature and being able to help navigate through those situations. And so that's kind of what all of our community health workers do. I'm down in Los Angeles County. I have another coworker that's under me by the name of Sherrod Johnson. He's down in LA County. We have someone up in Sacramento. We have other people up in Oakland, down in San Diego. We have some over here in Riverside County as well as San Bernardino County. But then also, community health workers can tell you where to go. I can't tell you how many times I ask people who call me and they want us to come down and advocate for them. I said, well, where are you planning on going, or how did you get there? Because hospitals have told us we don't want them. We don't want to see people with sickle cell. Tell them not to come here. So us as community health workers, we know where to send people. You know, we're like, hey, look, these people have knowledgeable providers here. Hey, we've done grand rounds over here. Hey, I know so and so over here. Let me give them a call and let them know that you're on the way. Um, so I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think the work on the pediatric side that needs to happen is, they got to start educating patients better. I can't tell
Yes.
you how many times I get an adult who doesn't know what their disease process is.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, where did you go? And they went to a pretty good, pediatric center. But for one reason or another, they didn't teach them about their disease or
Yeah.
why they should be taking certain medications or why this is important. They kind of just did it. So now when you've thrown them out here, you know, they don't really know why this is important. So I don't know. I mean, there's always work to be done.
Yeah.
Uh, but we got some good work going on here.
Yeah. I heard you say, well, you're not the first person I heard say that the information is lost from a pediatric standpoint. I do feel like we need to make sure that we have families and whoever's impacted by sickle cell to have that conversation to make sure that we're providing education around that, because once they do the transition, because I know there's really no set transition model in place, and that's something I'm currently working on. I think that will make that transition process way easier. Making sure that everybody has a level of understanding. I mean, just the basics. Like you said, a lot of them don't even know. Sometimes some of the patients come in, they don't even know what type of sickle cell they have, and that's
Yeah.
alarming to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. With Camp Crescent Moon, our camp for kids with sickle cell disease, for that week they go through an education process. We call it designer genes, and there's a dramatic difference. And those kids are only ages 7 to 14. But if they start at camp when they're 7 and they go through every year, their knowledge base is better than some of my 22, 23 year olds just about their disease. So you got to start that process early and make everybody aware of the process.
So I guess, okay. So here's my next thought behind it. So you and I talked last week, Mr. James. And I hope you don't mind me putting this out there so that we can get other people to kind of give us some input. So, and then Anthony, you can jump in too. So we have patients that actually work, and due to the FMLA process, Anthony, a lot of patients hit that attendance warning, or they get these marks because one, they're in pain, so they're missing work. They haven't done enough to get the FMLA, or they haven't been there the full year. What do you have any advice that you guys do in California pertaining to this? Do you have anything that we can kind of shine that about?
I would try the Department of Rehabilitation. I don't know. Well, I got to check and see if that's a state program or a federal program. But out here, we have the Department of Rehabilitation. And so basically, what they do is they work with any person who has any type of chronic illness or disease or any type of handicap. And so what they do is they train a person specifically for a job that would be better suited for them, and then they help them with job placement. Now, everybody doesn't take advantage of that, but it is a tool and a resource that is available. But I do have to check, and I'm pretty sure it's a federal thing. Um,
It
but
makes sense.
that's mainly what we do. Um, Outside of that, uh, what we try and do is we try and have this conversation with them as far as being open about their disease with their person. I mean, not with their person, but with their whoever
Employee.
their employer is.
Employer.
Yeah, yeah. And so basically what we try and do is we talk to them early about what restrictions that they may need. And we say, hey, talk to HR, let HR know what's going on. They're gonna give you something for the doctor to fill out. Bring that to us and let's get this done early. That way you can stay gainfully employed. You know.
Yeah, I think there's one piece. So even with that, working in HR, I think the one thing that I see is, when you have a reasonable accommodation request, right, under the ADA, but then if an employer has a no fault attendance policy, that's that bridge, that gap we have to figure out, how do we bridge, because you don't qualify for Family Medical Leave Act until you've been there a year or 1,250 hours, right? A year and 1,250 hours. And so it's important. It's a bridge there. So even with the accommodation, if there's a no fault attendance policy, that could be a hurdle, right? Where you could have employees through no fault of their own, right, be impacted because it is truly a no fault attendance policy. So while you're not there, it doesn't employer. Now I'm not saying doesn't care, but it's your right not to be there because it's no fault. But then it can also lead to your termination if you violate the policy. So I think it's important that we try to figure out what that looks like for rare diseases and employees that are impacted. So not sure what that looks like yet, but that's definitely something that's on my radar to try to understand. That's a discussion with legislators. That's a whole community thing, right? Because and there may be some, as we mentioned, Ms. Scott, there may be some states that have something, that do something a little different. Not sure. So this is a great platform again to have this diverse discussion with diverse communities and seeing, hey, what is your state doing different, or is there something in place that we can then start to share that states just may not be aware of. And then most of the time, if employers do know, like you just said, as when you're talking to them and you share that, from again being in HR, the one thing you think about too is fairness, trying to treat everybody, even though everybody's not equal, trying to be fair, right? Because it could be so subjective too, right? Because now you have some people that may take advantage of that, and how you differentiate. So it is something personally that I'm working through with my son right now. He's being a trooper about it, and as well as his employer. But I mean, it's still the law is the law currently, and companies and organizations' attendance policy is their attendance policy. So that's the one. So I'm interested to see what Ohio has, and you mentioned some things California have, and I'm excited about us continuing this connection and discussion, outside of this forum,
Yeah,
because I
Mr.
think it's
James, you live in Tennessee.
yeah. I live in Tennessee.
Okay, yeah, because I just checked. So they definitely have a vocational rehabilitation in Tennessee. They got one in Ohio. So I do think it's a federal program. So,
Okay.
for anybody that's out there watching, if you're curious, definitely look up the Department of Rehabilitation in your area and see what services that they can provide to to your group.
Yeah,
Hey, that's
because
good.
maybe
Appreciate that, AC.
I was gonna say maybe they have some type of form that they work with as well, in addition to you know,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's good. So definitely we'll check into that.
yeah. So okay, so Anthony, I never even got to ask you starting off. So how did you even get into sickle cell?
I got into sickle cell by mistake. Um, I was living in Kansas City with my aunt and uncle, and I actually wanted to really just come back home for my birthday. And so I, asked them to get me a plane ticket back home just for a week or so I could at least just go home, see some of my friends, do some hood rat stuff, regular stuff. Um, and so they said, we have no problem getting you a plane ticket. The only thing is that in order for you to work for this plane ticket, you have to do a week of camp. And so at the time, I had no idea what Camp Crescent was. But in order to get home, I was like, sure, I'll do it. So I went online, filled out the application, did my interview. And so they got my ticket. I went down, and I was just remember being so just so happy. I'm it's not to, demean anybody else, but I love seeing other black people. I love seeing them happy, and to see all these black kids that were running around, and there weren't any police involved or anything like that. It was just a great time, and just seeing other successful black people. And so I was like, I wanted to come back. At that point, though, I really didn't have a lot of sickle cell knowledge. So when I started to come back that second year, a lot of the camp staff who had sickle cell started to become my actual friends that I would hang out with outside of camp. And so when they would get sick, they would call, and I would go up to the hospitals, and I would just start mess until my people got taken care of. And so one day, Portia Langdon, she called me up. She was the one of the camp directors, but she also, works at the Sickle Cell Foundation. She was like, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a community health worker?" I said, "I have no idea what a community health worker is." She said, "Well, it has a lot to do with advocacy. You know a little bit about sickle cell, but I think if we strengthen your knowledge on sickle cell, I think you'd be all right. Why don't you come in for an interview?" And so I came in, I did my interview, I did really well. And they had just got a grant from SCDAA to hire community health workers. So that's kind of how I got my start. And, I stayed in it. I had a good friend by the name of Kumasi Washington, who was very happy when I started working in sickle cell. He just said, my people can be very difficult, but just don't give up on us. And unfortunately, he passed a few years ago, but I just always remember that. He always just said, just don't give up on my people. And so, to make sure that I'm doing right by him, I'm still here. I love what I do. I love problem solving. I love just being able to see, people who, for one reason or another, thought that their life was over or they should have been dead by now, get them to rethink. Like, no, you can have a family, you can have kids, you can have a life. It's just about how do we navigate and how do we get there. And so that's kind of how I got started. I'll probably be here another 30 or 40. Uh, as a manager now, I'm responsible for, you know, helping cultivate other community health workers, which is great. The only thing I don't like about it is that it takes me out of the clinic sometimes, because patients is what I love the most, or clients are what I love the most. But uh, this is a special community, and they've been down a long time, and so I just want to do everything I can to make sure that they're up.
Yeah, yeah. That's a nice story.
Bravo, brother. Bravo.
So Miss Johnson said, I'm not sure if you all heard of this, but I've been on Red Cell program for 23 years. I haven't heard of this program. What is I
Is
figured
she talking about exchanges? I think she's talking about exchanges.
that's what I figured. Um,
Yeah. The only thing about exchanges, Ms. Johnson, is that the facility has to have enough money to buy the exchange machine. That's the thing that I found out, because I asked one of our doctors recently. I said, "Well, why isn't everybody who's on blood transfusions on just chronic exchanges?" I'm like, "You don't get the iron or anything like that." They said, "Well, most facilities can't afford the exchange machine." So I agree, but there are other avenues now out there. Obviously, Dafio and Oxbryta and Dari. So, there's a lot of good things happening in the sickle cell space. I know out here there's a lot of clinical trials with gene therapy. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I say it's definitely more promising than it was in 1950 or the 70s, because there's a lot more advances. So I do say this is this is a good time that we're living in. And then I don't know if you caught the talk before, but with Andre, but I definitely feel like this particular generation speaks out a lot about how they feel, what they not tolerating. They use legislators. They're on Capitol Hill a lot. So I do love the fact that more patients are speaking out about their diagnosis, whereas we know in the past people were very hush hush. They wouldn't really express how they were feeling or what they were going through. So I do feel like this particular generation is way more open, you know, to let people know what's going on. She said that makes me happy. I'm very hopeful. I love that you all have this platform. Please keep doing an amazing job. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's the goal. The goal is to get the message out there however I have to convey it. Mr. James, I see you do a lot of talks too on newscasts, and I see you doing your advocacy.
Yeah, but it goes back to that. How do we get that momentum, right? Because the three of us could push a lot further, a lot faster than just one. So that, I'm excited though, just the connections that are being made, and it just, I'm excited about that. And it's one thing that I've also been learning a lot about, is just that, one thing we were just talking about, like the machines and different things. It's the funding, right? So that's one of the things that I'm really, really huge on as well, right? How do we increase the research funding that goes with sickle cell? And then a lot of that too comes from our collective voices, right? Because again, we're all pushing in the same direction, but kind of in different spaces. We got to figure out how to engage and mobilize with our legislators and understand that there's some funding and research that should be going, that things can move a lot faster. And so that's what I'm excited about. Just what's going to happen next, right? Because the momentum is getting there, like you said, and it's making those connections and making that engagement, and that education and awareness piece is so critical. And I think if we just start talking about that, we need more funding for research, or we need to figure out, okay, where can we get these machines, areas that need the machines, right? Because if you look at the cost, what we, I just Googled it real quickly as we're talking about. I'm like, well, how much do these machines cost? And if I hit the right thing, I think it's like what, 25, 50 grand a machine, somewhere in that space, right? Which, sounds like a lot, but as we know, really it is not when we got behind it. So we got a lot more work to do. So I'm excited, because we can, you know, and the difference that we're gonna see, what, at this point in my young life, I'm like, I may not even really see all of the full impact of the things I'm doing now, but that's not what I'm doing it for anyway. And
Right.
so we got to continue the frequent discussions. But this is great. I mean, I've learned a lot tonight just being on this call, having this discussion. AC, you're gonna have to share some of that information of what you have going on in California. I would tell you, in Tennessee, we have a Sickle Cell Foundation of Tennessee, which is pretty active. And so that's part of my other piece, right? Because if you look at Tennessee on the map, it's really long. I mean, it takes me 6 hours. I'm in East Tennessee and Memphis, if you will. Nashville is in Middle Tennessee and Memphis is in West Tennessee. It's about a 6.5 hour difference. But and in the state of Tennessee, the majority of the sickle cell patients are in Memphis, and then as you start moving east, then they're in Nashville, and then you start getting into Knoxville, Chattanooga area. And so we have some of the things that you mentioned. Some of the sickle cell clinics are in Memphis and in Nashville. We're trying to get it in Knoxville. But just that machine that we were just talking about, it's like, man, that just planted a whole nother seed. Like, just wondering how many communities don't have that. And
Trust me, you would be surprised. I mean, even institutions out here that you would think like, oh man, every time you turn around, they on the news, somebody giving them a donation, they got gold toy, all type of stuff, but they don't, whatever reason, they don't have certain stuff, or I mean, some of them don't even have the software that goes on the MRI machine, to be able to see what's going on with people who are iron overloaded. So yeah, I think it's a allocation of resources.
well, sometimes.
I kind of go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just saying, sometimes, you know what, you think about that. And sometimes if people just don't have an awareness, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Or sometimes if it's not kept in front of you, I think that's another reason why we may be connected, to start to identify where is that need. And then how do we just say, hey, out of that couple $1 million foundation grant you just got, hey, you know what, you could fund at least a couple of these machines, and just start saying, hey, here's what we need, right? And here's what we need to have.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of piggyback when you were talking about funding research. Um, I will say that it's very important for patients to really, really express the concerns that that's happening to them. Because when we talk about, like, for instance, I ran a study at one of the agencies I'm currently working for, just to see how care providers. So I was assessing PTSD, anxiety, and depression in caregivers of sickle cell patients, because we never ever think about the caregivers, right? Or we don't address it, because we know things just have to be done regardless of how we feel as parents. We still got to make sure the kids is right. So just pushing that, I sent the research to certain people in the community for sickle cell, and I still didn't get the outcomes that I wanted. But it's not going to stop me from pushing that. But I think just having that level of understanding, because some of those I use, a couple validity or credible sources to make sure that we were, getting that research piece to see if these people were really dealing with anxiety, depression. But then I also created my own questionnaire in addition to that. And some of the questions that I asked, just the basic, like, how did you feel when you first found out, your child was diagnosed, right? People answered all types of questions. They answered it in all different types of forms, but it still didn't show like anxiety, or the because the pilot was so small, it didn't really push the number as I expected it would have. But then I also thought about, like, our culture. We've been tested on so many levels. I don't even think we understand what stress really is, because we just go and go. We don't sit back and think about things. We just do. And I think it's just, that's something that has been embedded in us for years. It's like, how do you relax? Somebody's asking you your true feelings. How do you answer that? You understand what I mean? So when we talk about research, I think I do see it in the future, because you have people such as myself, such as Andre, and many others that are, one, impacted by sickle cell doing these researches, and we're trying to make sure that we create the buzz so that the funding comes with it, because we know if there is no research, there is no funding. So we want to make sure that we are focusing on topics that will push the needle, if that makes sense, to make some type of change. So I just wanted
No.
to.
No, I think that's great though. I think the one thing that you're starting to build is just this network, right? This network of like-minded people that now when you expand your population that you're going to serve, your sample size can grow, right? Because now you got my wheels spin. I'm like, man, we could take that and do it here in Tennessee, and I'm already thinking about Knoxville, Nashville, Memphis, Chattanooga, right? I'm originally from Michigan, right? And so I think there's a strategy again that when we get strategic and put our plan together and just execute that plan, I think there's a way to do that, because that research is important. Because you hit me because I can still remember to today when I found out in 1994 when they told me about my son, right? And when they initially didn't know, and then they had to come back and confirm it. And then I can remember in 2000 when they told me about my daughter, when they initially told me she didn't have it, right? And then 2 weeks later, because that's one thing we wanted to know. Then 2 weeks later, they came back and told us she did, right? How I know exactly how it felt, right? And so it just hit me when you said that, right? And so I think that it's again, as we start down this path and get people comfortable, because we are culturally, we are private people, right? We don't open up, we don't share with each other. So I think it's going to be important that we utilize those networks, so the people that AC know AC, right? They'd be more apt to respond, because AC is asking him and he's explaining to him exactly what he's looking for. And I think we leverage that, right? Because we normally won't, because one, we're private, we're suspicious, we have to just be real about the history, right? We don't, and so that's the other piece that I talk about. The other thing I didn't share, I'm on the board of directors for a regional blood center, and it's great, right? It's great because I get to work with medical professionals, and we talk, and I can really be honest and transparent about, we have to recognize that there's some reluctance in our community when we try to connect, because I'm trying to increase diverse blood donors, but there's some reluctance in our community when we start connecting whatever we're doing with the medical field. And hey, and then sometimes people just scatter needles, and so it's so many different pieces to this thing that just having these kind of discussions has got me excited, because now I got my network is expanding. I can reach out and say, hey, AC, I can call them, hey, text them, hey, I need some help on this. What do you think? What's been your experience? Ms. Scott, you and I have already been talking back and forth, so I think we are on the cusp of something really great in so many terms, in so many different terms and dynamics, that it's awesome. But that research is really important, because that research helps to drive that message when you start talking about going to get that funding.
No, yeah, I agree with you, Mr. James. I tell people all the time that we as people got to get back to, I guess the way they used to say it is just kind of old school. When you were doing something, you got caught, the neighborhood could, you know, discipline you. But that's because Mama Johnson knew, you know, uh, Betty Sue down there, and everybody knew your father, and they knew your so and so. It's that is definitely one of the other issues is just trying to get everybody together and understand why it's important that we do this thing in groups and numbers, because you guys talk about money, you wonder why cystic fibrosis and hemophilia and HIV and AIDS, they got all the money they got. That's because even with them people dying, they were like, no, 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 we getting together and we getting ready to go get what we need, and when we get there, it's going to be a beautiful sight.
Yeah, yeah. I just hope we get there sooner than later. Um, I think that there's a lot that we could do if we work collectively together. Um, as I stated before, I use my platform for good. I'm always looking for ways to, you know, collaborate or, you know, just sharing the information. I think we need to stop being in this stingy mode. You know, oh, I don't want to share these resources, but ultimately, it's to really help everybody that's impacted by
Mm-hmm.
sickle cell. So it's not a me thing, it's not a James thing or AC
That's
thing.
right.
It's a sickle cell, and that's really what we have to get to, a level of like really, as we stated before, counting numbers. I want to be able to go buy something from the store that say sickle cell like we do with breast cancer. I would love to have that magnitude, especially since so many people are impacted. We talking about over 100,000 Americans. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to go to a store and purchase a shirt or a hat or some socks or anything like that, and that money comes back full circle to
And,
whether it's research or, you know, helping patients.
yeah, it's crazy that you say that. When I think I shared with you. I don't know if I did or not. In Nashville, well, here in Tennessee, we had Sickle Cell Day on the Hill, March 1st. So my son and I, we went down with the CEO from the Sickle Cell Foundation, met some legislators, met some other great warriors. There was a young man there. He had on a sickle cell sweatshirt, right? And I would start talking about it. And he said he designed the shirts. He was a sickle cell warrior, and he designed shirts and sweatshirts, and it was just awesome, and it was all sickle cell themed. And so I mean it's just those kind of connections. So when you start saying that, then it's just starting to spread that, make that connection, bringing him in. It's ways to do it, right? And this is where the foundation gets started, right here, and it's where we just then start to connect. Because I'm sure Mr. AC, you know some people out there in California that are involved in art that would be great with doing that. I'm sure you got some things. And so before you know it, there you go. Look at, you got California, Michigan, Tennessee, Ohio, just on a quick call, just on being on the call, our call. We've got those kind of connections. And so it's just, now it all comes down to honesty. It's the challenge of throwing down the gauntlet and like, okay, this has been a great call. This has been great discussion. Okay, now what?
Yep, yep. I just know for me, I wanted to, and I didn't mention this. Cory couldn't make it today because his plane was delayed. But other than that, Cory would have been here. Um, I wanted to have this call because we don't see a lot of men speak out about their experiences, and you always see the women in the forefront. But I feel like men, you guys have voice. You know, you have a voice too, and I think that it's powerful to see one black men um you know, speak out about their experiences and being vulnerable. Like, I think we have this misconception that men are not supposed to show their vulnerability, and I really want to get away from that. I really think that this is the time. You know, your story, Mr. James, can shape and alter the way another parent may feel. Oh, I can get through this. Now you have a 28 and a 22-year-old daughter, you know, so you've been dealing with this for 28 years. So you could be a resource or a guide to help the next person that's dealing with it. I mean, I might have some questions. My kids are still relatively young, they're 7 and 8. So there's still things that I'm learning in the midst of it. So I don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers, but I try to tell people I don't have all the answers. I will seek and
Mm-hmm.
ask and inbox, and you know, I utilize my platforms just for that. I take networking very seriously, and it's, to me, it's all a brand. It's all on how you want to get that message out. So I really believe in conveying a message and making people hear it, but also learn in the process. So that is the reason for these talks and these, you know, these discussions. But with that being said, um, I just want to thank the two of you for taking time out of your day. And if any of you want to follow AC Wells, you can find him on SCD Foundation on social medias. And if you want to follow Mr. James Harrison, It's his name, at James Harrison. So you guys can locate them on social media. I say use them for your advantage, to learn, to gain that connection or that partnership. But I will definitely be reaching out to you guys. I think we should really take that work, that FMLA problem that we're having. I think that's something that we can see what California is doing, Ohio is doing, and you being in Tennessee, and kind of come back to the table to come up with some type of solution to be able to take to our legislators to see what that looks like. So I think that's important for us to really circle back and do so. So if you guys are not opposed to that, I will definitely be reaching out to you on that.
Yeah, no, I am. I'm definitely there. I would love that. I want to thank you for this opportunity. This has been awesome. And Ms. Stacy, it was a pleasure meeting you, man. I commend the work you're doing. Please keep it up. I'm gonna tell you this. I'm gonna be coming back because we're gonna figure out how we're gonna get some community health workers here in East Tennessee. So I'm gonna be coming to you so we can unpack that thing. But this was awesome. Thank you so much, Mrs. Scott. I mean, this is awesome. This is an awesome platform. Thank you for the opportunity to be on it.
No problem. Once again, you guys, I'm gonna put it back up there so y'all can follow them.
Yeah, or if they want, they can email me. They can email me at anthonyw@scdfc.org. I'm always available. I'm always checking my email. If they ever want to get in contact with me.
And I'm okay too, Miss Scott. Hey, I believe in using what works. You can share my AOL email address. I'm okay with that.
Hey, now I got a joke behind the AOL, but I'm not even gonna put it out there today.
Thank you so much.
But no, thank you guys, and I will see my viewers next week, 2 p.m. on Monday the 17th. I have Miss Muhammad coming, so you guys want to stay tuned for that. That's Monday the 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So everybody have a good night.
All right, thank you. Good night.
All right.